ॐ निरञ्जनं नित्यम् अनन्तरूपं भक्तानुकम्पाधृतविग्रहं वै ईशावतारं परमेशमीड्यं तं रामकृष्णं शीर्षा नमामः. Namaste everyone and welcome back to our study of the Vedanta lectures of Swami Vivekananda. We are studying one of his famous lectures, the Vedanta, delivered in 1897 in Lahore. And this is our fourth lecture. As I had shared with you, we are uploading the audio and the videos of these classes, so they'll be useful to you to revise as we go. Please go through them, listen to them, watch them. And so today we'll just read this part before we go to the next paragraph. But if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to ask at this stage or at any stage. Just put your hand up. So, just a little bit of revision. Okay, the inner mechanics, the antakarana, the mind. How does it work? What is meant by these terms chitta, manas, buddhi, and ahankara in the Sankhya philosophy, the Vedanta? So Swamiji says, well, then you have to understand what is meant by manas, buddhi, chitta, and ahankara first. First of all, let us take chitta. It is the mind stuff, a part of the cosmic mind, mahat. It is the generic name for the mind itself, including its various states. Okay, so manas, mind means chitta, mana, buddhi, ahankara all together. The English word mind, the Sanskrit equivalent is antakarana, and it has got these four states of chitta, mana, buddhi, ahankara. So Swamiji gives an example. Suppose on a summer evening there is a lake, smooth and calm, without a ripple on its surface. And suppose someone throws a stone into this. What happens? First, there is that action, the blow given to the water. Next, the water rises and sends a reaction towards the stone. So in physics, every action has a reaction. Likewise, the lake responds, and the response is seen as a series of concentric circles that spread out. And that reaction takes the form of a wave. First, the wave vibrates a little and immediately sends back a reaction in form of a wave. So let us compare the chitta to this lake. Swamiji uh, in his commentary on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras says, what is chitta? It's the mind stuff. Means the stuff, the substance out of which the mind is made. Here it's equivalent to the water. And the external objects are like the stones thrown into it. The sensations, five senses, they uh, take in various forms of energy, light, heat, sound, etc., and they disturb the mind, or they might be coming from the subconscious mind, your memories. So if all the senses are shut down, and they still the mind breaks into the ripples, the chitta breaks into the ripples, and that's because from the subconscious mind, these memories rise to the surface, to the conscious mind. So as soon as it comes in contact with any external object by means of these indriyas, the indriyas must be there to carry these external objects inside. These are indriyas are the senses. There is a vibration, and that vibration is called the manas. It's the indecisive stage. It's called sankalpa vikalpa, whether it's this or that. The reaction is the determinative faculty, the buddhi, okay, which is called nishchayatmika. Nishchaya means I make a determination, I come to a conclusion, and that is the buddhi. And along with this buddhi flashes the idea, I am, aham bhava. That means I is there all the time, but it identifies with that buddhi, with that reaction, and says, oh, I see, type of thing. Oh, I experience is pain. And that's the idea of the I. And then we conclude that by saying there's an external object. Perception happens in the mind space, but we think there's an object out there. What we are actually experiencing is the change that is happening in the chitta, in our mind stuff. Now, suppose there is a mosquito sitting on my hand. The sensation is carried to my chitta and it vibrates a little. This is the psychological manas. At this stage, if it's a manas, it hasn't decided whether it's a mosquito or a fly. Then there is a reaction. Okay, so that manas makes a little bit of change. A vibration appears in the mind. That vibration, you can imagine, is then compared with any pre-existing experience that is there in the stored in the mind. And when it comes together in matches, then you come to the conclusion and say, this is what I have experienced before. It was a mosquito. This is a similar experience. And I come to that conclusion. So I come to a conclusion means this is the buddhi kicks in. So then there's a reaction and immediately comes the idea that I have a mosquito on my hand. And it's not a very nice thing. So the reaction is, okay, I must drive it off. So because it's harmful to me. Thus, these stones are thrown in the lake. That means the sensations are thrown into the chitta. But in the case of every lake, case of the lake, every blow that comes to it comes from the external world. While in the case of the lake of the mind, the blow may come either from the external world or the internal. This series is what is called, this whole series is what is called Antakarna. Okay, I hope that gives a good, clear understanding, explanation of what is meant by the mind in the Sankhya and the Vedanta philosophy. Now, let's go on. So, what is knowledge? And who is the knower? And what happens in there? A little bit more is explained here. So, along with it, you ought to understand one thing more that will help us in understanding the Advaita system later on. It is this. All of you must have seen pearls, and most of you know that know how pearls are formed. A grain of sand enters into the shell of a pearl oyster and sets up an irritation there. And the oyster's body reacts towards the irritation and covers the little particle with its own secretion or juice. Over time, that crystallizes and forms the pearl. So that's the example given. Swamiji is going to use. So the whole universe is like that. It is the pearl which is being formed by us. So imagine when we were born into this world as a child, we don't know anything. The fives, we were born, popped into this world, senses are firing, and so we begin to take all these energies through the five senses. All right, and then there's a reaction from inside. And that reaction is what we call the world. And each one has got a different experience, and therefore they have a different set of reactions, and that is their world. That is the pearl that each and everyone has formed in this world. What we get from the external world is simply the blow. Even to be conscious of that blow, we have to react. And as soon as we react, we really project a portion of our own mind towards the blow. This is very, very important. So the world, like five people are seeing the same thing, maybe watching a cricket match or football or whatever is there. They have the same energy entering into the eyes and through the ears. Yet each one perceives differently, depending which team you are supporting and all that. So you're happy or unhappy by what is happening in there, who is winning and losing. So why is that? Each one is having a different experience because each person is projecting a portion of their own mind towards the blow. And when we come to know of it, it is really our own mind as it has been shaped by the blow. This is important. So what we know is not the thing only. It is the thing plus our own mind. How it was conditioned, how it was colored, what color, how we color it. Therefore, it is clear even to those who want to believe in a hard and fast realism of the external world. So there are these philosophers, Western philosophers, realists, who say, well, the external world exists there. It's an objective thing, and all of us are perceiving the same thing. Well, from the Vedanta point of view, they say, yes, a part, something is there which feeds into us, which throws those pebbles into our chitta. But what we experience is not that external world only, but there is a subjective component. That means we contribute our part to it. And most of the time, we do not acknowledge that. We don't say that, okay, what I'm saying is something plus my mind. We say, oh no, I see that, and I'm very sure that's how it is, and I'm very, very objective about it, and therefore going to be very judgmental about it. If we had this Vedanta understanding, then we will put a pause button and say, why am I seeing what I'm seeing? And you say, okay, something is coming from outside, but I'm contributing quite a bit to it. And if I'm seeing something bad there, then maybe my mind is contributing that something bad. Not that that person is bad. It's because I've been hearing so many bad things about him and all that. And the moment I see him, all those ideas come and superimpose onto that person. And I come to the experience of conclusion that's a bad person. So, but Vedantas, if you really understand this, then we'll be very careful not to be very, very critical and opinionated and all those type of things, but we'll say, why is it that I see something bad there? And if I'm contributing something, then I need to take care of that. I have to cleanse that mind. And for such a person, then he's not going around changing people, he's not going being judgmental and criticizing others. He says, there is something that internal work has to be done, and that is the focus then. And he understands that the real work is chitta shuddhi, purification of the mind. All those things that are there collected in this life, in previous lifetime lives, as our samskaras, as our conditionings, which must be reconditioned or deconditioned. So therefore, it is clear, even to those who want to believe in a hard and fast realism of an external world, which they cannot but admit in these days of physiology, that supposing we represent the external world by X, what we really know is X plus the mind. And this mind element is so great that it has covered the whole of X, which has remained unknown and unknowable throughout. Okay, so that X is unknown and unknowable. That is the pebble that was thrown. The mind reacts. It breaks into these waves. And our preconceived notions and previous experiences, if it could be good, it could be bad, it could be traumatic and all those things, that is now superimposed on that X, and that superimposition part is a major part of it. The outside sensation could be 10%, 90% is what we have loaded onto that. In the Vedanta language, it is in English, it's called adhyarop, means I superimpose something that is not there, but I superimpose it. And they use the example that at dusk, if you see there's a snake, actually there's a rope lying there, but because there's not sufficient light, a person who has been hearing about snakes and all that, suddenly the moment he sees that, he says, ah, there's a snake. What he has done is he has superimposed the snake onto the rope, and therefore he can't see the rope anymore. Where's that snake? Is it in the does it exist in the rope? No, it exists in the mind of the person. And it's that mind which superimposes its conditioning onto this substance which is called a rope here. And when sufficient light is shown onto the rope, then that superimposition is removed and we see things as they are. So, what does Vedanta say? Vedanta says that there is an unknown and unknowable entity, which is pure consciousness, which is Brahman. Onto that, we superimpose the world that we experience. And because we all are tuned to the same frequency, so we support each other by asserting or confirming that we are seeing the same thing. And then that happens again and again and again. And then we come to this illusion or ignorance. That's why it's called avidya, ignorance, that what I'm seeing really inside is really out there. So let's read this sentence again because there is a very important idea. So that supposing we represent the external world by X, what we really know is X plus the mind, and this mind element is so great that it has covered the whole of that X, which has remained unknown and unknowable. And therefore, if there is an external world, it is always unknown and unknowable. What we know of it is as it is molded, formed, fashioned by our own mind. What came from the outside world is like that grain, but the oyster formed into a pearl. The world, the universe that we experience is the pearl that we have fashioned, and now we superimpose or we color it. Every sensation from the outside is colored by the mind itself. And therefore, if there is an external world, it is always unknown and unknowable. What we know of it is as it is molded, formed, and fashioned by our own mind. So,
Also,
with external world.
Swamiji,
Mm.
Swamiji, also the external world is limited within our five senses, isn't it? Whatever we know of the external world, apart from the delta, it's only the five, whatever the five senses have permitted to come in
Yeah,
of the
and
external world.
of course, there's so much more there. I suppose you had an X-ray
Mm.
and like Superman or microwave and gamma ray or infrared. Even there are so many insects like bees and flies. They have a much broader range of eyes that can capture and see more than our human eyes. So yes, we are seeing through some small holes. Sri Ramakrishna explains, suppose somebody is enclosed in a steel box and there are five holes in there. And so he peeps out through that. And his world is what he perceives through those five worlds. We have these five senses. Who is an realized soul? A realized soul is one who lives in a glass box, so to say. And there's no limitation to it. So he is able to receive the totality of this, as an analogy. But you're right. We see a small bandwidth only. And that bandwidth also changes. Okay. So you suppose when we read that analogy or explanation of Maya that Swami Vivekananda gave to his disciple Manmanath Ganguly, so he starts with what we call this normal world, in which he was sitting on the bank of the Ganges, looking at the river and the trees and hearing Swamiji, which is the normal common experience. What happens is what Swamiji, by his mental power, lifted his mind up. And as he lifted up, suddenly all that five senses got disconnected. Or initially they all sort of were vibrating. Okay, that means the difference between his mind is now changing to a higher frequency, and the sensations that were at low, the delta is changing, and his experience, everything is vibrating. And then they disappear. They sort of go out of the bandwidth, and he experiences a vibration within. Okay, and then he lifts that mind to another level, and everything has become that consciousness on all directions. So something is there which at one stage appears as consciousness, at another stage appears as the mind, and at another level appears as this world. Just to keep in mind that we are just experiencing the tip of the iceberg, a very small part, a very gross mind. The greater sum total of the reality is beyond our access in this stage. when we are sense bound. And that's why they say uh, spirituality is about a supersensuous experience. One has to transcend the limitations of the senses. That means somehow we have to give up our identification, positively try to give up our identification with the body and the senses, knowing that these are very limited. Not only very limited, they only mislead and hide the reality, so to say. The reality remains unknown and unknowable because this technology, the tools that we have, sensory perceptions by nature are defective. In the Kathopanishad, when Yamaraj starts teaching Nachiketa the Upanishadic knowledge, he starts with Paranchi Khani Vetrinat Swayambhu. Khani means the senses. Parang means outwards, it's directed externally. The senses are directed externally. Vetrinat Swayambhu. The word sense in Sanskrit, Vetrinat means it has got a built-in defect in it. That means it will never sort of reveal the truth. What it will reveal is this difference between me. That means the mind will come in between. When the two energies, my attention from inside and the energy from outside, they come together and meet in the mind space where the reaction happens, we can understand that like two waves come and have an interference. What we are experiencing is that interference pattern that is generated in the mind, the wave that is created. So we never know the reality. Keeping this in mind makes us a bit humble and careful, saying that we are not going to be judgmental. And if we are going to be judgmental, then I'm not going to blame somebody out there, but to blame the way my mind has been fashioned. And if I'm seeing something impure or bad out there, that badness is not really on the person out there, it is within us. That makes us a bit careful and say, okay, how do we go about sorting this in or purifying the mind? And spiritual life is really about that. So the same applies, and so with the internal world. So these waves are the waves that are created are not only by the external senses, but by what is stored in our own mind. Samskaras, impressions. They're called latent impressions. Samskaras means latent impression. Latent means it has a potentiality at some point to come to the conscious mind and disturb or break the calm lake into these waves. And that is what our thinking and our reasoning and our daydreaming and our planning and everything is happening in that space. The same applies to our soul, the Atman. In order to know the Atman, we shall have to know it through the mind. And therefore, what little we know of this Atman is simply the Atman plus the mind. Okay, because everywhere the mind jumps in and disturbs. When we're trying to look inwards, the mind comes and covers the Atman. So whatever we had conditioned ourselves, for example, I was experiencing myself as the body or my memories, impressions, all those things, that covers the Atman also. That is to say, the Atman covered over, fashioned and molded by the mind and nothing. That is to say, the Atman covered over, fashioned and molded by the mind and nothing more. We shall return to this a little later, but we will remember what has been told here. So this beautiful explanation in a very, very systematic, scientific way that Swami Vivekananda gave. If you went through the Upanishads and tried to read them on your own, it won't come out in such simple language. Here it's just the essence is taken out and put in a very beautiful, simple English language with all these analogies. So what do we get out of this paragraph? Okay, knowledge as a projection. That means we project X plus the mind externally and internally. So the mind is the problem. It conditions what we see externally. It also conditions what we are internally. Okay. Any question there? Yeah, good. So the next thing to understand is this. The question arose that this body is the name of one continuous stream of matter, a flux, constantly changing. Okay, so like a river that is flowing. You went to the river yesterday and took a bath, and then you went to the river today and took a bath, and you come back and tell that I took the bath in the same river. No, the water that touched in with which you bathed yesterday is not the same water that was there today. But we are just aware of that one continuity, that stream of matter, and we say that that is something permanent. That river is the same that I saw yesterday and is the same today, that type of thing. So the question arose that this body is the name of one continuous stream of matter. Every moment we are adding material to it. That means the food that we eat, cell division is happening so many times, and muscles and whatever is happening. At the same time, so many other cells are dying, and there is a constant destruction and construction happening in there. And when we are young, that replacement is all happening very nicely. So we are growing, we are able to maintain the quality. But at a certain age, we find that the replacement part is not so good. And that's where the skin begins to shrivel and the hair begins to turn gray and all that begins to happen. And at some point, it says, can't carry on, gives up, and the whole thing breaks down. So every moment we're adding material to it, and every moment material is being thrown off by it, like a river continually flowing, vast masses of water, always changing places. Yet, all the same, we take up the whole thing in imagination and call it the same river. What do we call the river? Every moment the water is changing, the shore is changing, every moment the environment is changing. What is the river then? It is the name of a series of changes, really. And so Swamiji uses that example, just as like the river is a real name of a series of changes. It's not something that's permanent there. The change is what we call that river. So with the mind. That is the great Shanika Vijnanavada doctrine. This comes from Buddhism. Okay, but the Buddhists made a big deal about it. So in Buddhism, just as a chain, there is no concept of the Atman. They don't say there is something permanent, unchanging as a background. They don't say there is a screen on which this colors, light are falling, and therefore we are seeing the movie. They say all that exists is that constant change. And they give an example. If you take a torch and whirl it around in a circle and very fast, then for somebody looking at that from a distance, it'll appear in the vision there is a circle of light there. Really, it is not a circle. At any point, if you took a photograph, you'll just see one torch, but the rapid movement gives the illusion of a circle that is formed. So the Buddhists say that there's really no Atman. What appears to be a circle is really a whole fast, rapidly changing mind or world in there. So this is the philosophy of the Shanika. Shana means momentary, Vijnanavada doctrine. Most difficult to understand, but most rigorously and logically worked out in the Buddhistic philosophy. And this arose in India in opposition to some part of the Vedanta. So Buddhists did not believe in the Atman. They say that is on the entity, a permanent reality like the Brahman or Atman is not necessary. Whatever is this change is there. There's no Atman. And the Atman nature is actually one of the foundational pillars of the Hindu philosophy or the Vedanta philosophy, the Vedic philosophy. So since the Buddhists threw out the idea of the Atman, they really got thrown out of India also. That's why even though India, Bodh Gaya, Buddha was born and preached in India, Yet if you go in India, there's hardly any practicing Buddhists. They all have moved out in Sri Lanka and this Cambodia, Asian countries. Why? Because they took the essence out. What is that essence? The Atman. The moment they took the Atman out, the whole religion didn't have a foothold in India. Okay, there's a beautiful lecture of Swami Vivekananda in the complete works called Buddhistic India. And he traces the whole series of how these thoughts and philosophies developed. It's a very fascinating study because in India, all these great religions rose and all these wonderful ideas. It's like a cauldron, all these chemicals were being mixing and all that. And when you go through all those phases, then you understand the religion of Hinduism or Vedanta as it is known today. Now, so they challenged the Vedanta philosophy. That had to be answered, and we shall see later on how it could be answered by Advaitism, and by nothing else. So when the Buddhistic put their philosophy, the Dvaita and Visishtha Advaita philosophies, they could not hold their fort. But Advaita came to the rescue, and Swamiji will later talk about that. We will also see how, in spite of people's curious notions about Advaitism, people's fright about Advaitism, it is the salvation of the world, because therein alone is to be found the reason of things. So, in other schools, faith, belief, and all those things are there. You believe in God, that He exists, He cannot be rationally explained, and all those things, but your faith is sufficient in there. But in just like in the modern day, the scientists, they want a logical explanation. And when they're challenged, then these other religions are not able to withstand the hard logic that the modern scientists and even these Buddhists were applying. But Advaita Vedanta could withstand that, and that's why Swami Vivekananda, when he was in America, paid a lot of attention and tried to take this Advaita Vedanta because he said it's a scientific religion. That means you can apply reasoning. Don't put aside reasoning. Apply reasoning, but know that the experience is beyond reasoning also. So he says dualism and other isms are very good as means of worship, very satisfying to the mind, and maybe they have helped the mind onward. But if man wants to be rational and religious at the same time, then Advaita is the one system in the world for him. So you'll find that. Yes, Shivani. Hello.
Sorry,
So,
sorry, I forgot to change that. Swamiji, is if when you look at Buddhistic view or Vedantic view, and
mhm,
you look at Atman, the Atman,
mhm.
with the framework you've been developing through this lecture, um, is the real difference between the Buddhist worldview and Vedantic worldview shunyam versus purnam, and also is it not just a way of perceiving, because they look at the essential emptiness of even the Atman, but at the most, when with the way you've laid it out, or Vivekananda has laid it out, if you go right back to Ahamkara and Brahma, then the Buddhist and Vedantic view, there's no real difference at that foundational level, except for a sense of one being potentiality or purnam and the other shunyam or devoid or emptiness. Is that a correct way of understanding it?
Suppose the ultimate experience of both the Buddhist and the Vedantist would be the same. but the way they present it is probably different. So the Buddhistic way is like, okay, if I am looking, say there's a white blackboard, okay, in which so many things have been sketched, and we ask somebody, what do you see? And the person will point out, I see those numbers, those things. And if one by one, if we keep on deleting them, ultimately we are left with one. So ultimately you ask, what do you see? He will say that one particular number is there. If that is deleted, then that person says, I don't see. Means it has become shunya. There's nothing there, nothingness. Nothingness means no thing, because attention was on the thing, and now there's no thing. So they say the reality is shunya. The Vedantists will say, no, it is like you are seeing all the colors that were manifested, but those colors have now merged into that color white, in which there's no manifestation of color. White light doesn't have any manifestation of color, but it is purna. In a unmanifest way, all those colors are still present in there. I suppose your Shunyavada and Purna probably would be something like that. It is something that is experienced. But what the Vedantis are saying, that when we have that state of experience of nirvana or Brahmagana, you don't become nothing. There is somebody who is experiencing it. And you cannot negate that experience. So I'm looking at the blackboard, all the numbers have been removed, but I, as the observer, I still exist. So the Brahman, the Vedantis say that consciousness, which is not focused on any small thing now, but it's that akhanda karakarika, means that infinite self-awareness. I am the conscious being, and I'm complete, and everything exists in me. I'm akhanda satchit ananda. That's the focus of the Vedantin. And it's in its application in your everyday life, it makes a huge difference. One, if you say that, hey, there is nothing, no reality, everything is empty, shunya. And another one says, no, I am that infinite being of the nature of infinite existence, infinite knowledge, infinite bliss. I'm pure, I'm perfect, I'm omniscient, omnipresent. That reality, that ocean is behind the wave. That is a very, very uplifting and wholesome approach for self awareness and interacting with the world. So yes, they're just those two philosophies are there, but in the Buddhistic philosophy, they say it's called anatmavada. There is no Atman in there. Interestingly, one of our Swamis is in Brisbane. His name is Atmeshananda. His name is Atmeshananda. He met Dalai Lama. And when he was introduced, he said, I'm Swami Atmeshananda. Dalai Lama in the philosophy says, hey, there's no Atman. It's Anatmavada. So it's not just a logical presentation of it. When its practical application comes into how we apply that, then the Vedanta is more wholesome, more powerful, and that's why Sri Krishna, when he teaches Vedanta to Arjuna, the first thing he does is introduces this idea of the Atman, the eternal, the immortal, the one that is not killed when all the warriors would be killed. Yeah. So it's part of the philosophy how we present it. One is say this, what is said as Shunyavada, and the other is Purnavada, basically are two ways of saying the same thing. But in the practical application of how I conceive of myself and the world, Advaita seems to be more of a very positive, is Purna, wholesome, infinite, yeah. And that's why in India it is still surviving there.
Thank you, Swamiji.
All right. So Swamiji is building up the case, trying to explain, the Advait, what is meant by Advaitism, and vis-a-vis they will come across other philosophies in which they will compare. Now we'll see that slowly Swamiji builds up this idea of the Atman, okay, and Paramatman there. So yes, he talked about this, so the world of the senses that are tossing, or the mind. What are the functions that are in states of the mind? Chitta, Mana, Buddhi, Ahankara. Then he talks about what we call knowledge is really X plus the mind. And then he talks about that mind itself is a constant change. It's a series of change. This like a river flowing. He talks about that. Then we come to this unchanging witness, the spiritual, non-material aspect of it. So he's introducing the idea of the Atman. Well, now we shall regard the mind as a similar river, continually filling itself at one end and emptying itself at the other end. Elsewhere, he gives an example of a whirlwind. Sometimes you have seen this in a hot summer day. There are these dust devils, they call it, little whirlwinds out there in the compound. You'll see spinning like a cyclonic thing, where you'll see this rapidly spinning vortex wave of air which sucks in leaves and dusts and spins them around and then throws them out, type of thing. Okay, so Swamiji says the mind or the jiva is really something like this. It's a bundle of energy, a vortex of energy, and it takes in things from one end and throws it out the other end. But that rapid movement gives it a sense of identity. That identity that is the jiva, actually, he says. So, okay. So let's say continually filling itself at one end and emptying itself at the other. Where is that unity which we call the Atman? The idea is this, that in spite of this continuous change in the body and in spite of this continuous change in the mind, there is in us something that is unchangeable, which makes our ideas of things appear unchangeable. When rays of light coming from different quarters fall upon a screen or a wall or upon something that is not changeable, then and then alone it is possible for them to form a unity. Like if I take a torchlight and I point it up in the sky in a dark night, and I ask you, is this torch switched on or off? And you would not be able to tell because you cannot see light. There's a beam of light that is flowing out of the torch. We cannot see that beam of light. You will say, can you please point the torch to that wall or something, so that that light will go and fall on that wall and bounce back and enter into your retina. And from that, we will conclude that the torch is on or off. So it must fall on something for that perception to happen. Then and then alone it is possible for them to form one complete whole. Where is this unity in the human beings, falling upon which, as it were, the various ideas will come to unity and become one complete whole? This certainly cannot be the mind itself, seeing that it's also changing. So there could be just a relative motion. One could be slightly different, and what we see is a difference, just like two planes flying together in the sky. If they're at the fighter jets, if they're flying at the same speed, they look at each other, they say there's no relative motion, we are not moving. But relative to the ground, they are all moving. To each other, their relative motion is zero. Therefore, there must be something which is neither the body, because the body is a continuous change, know the mind, because that is also a constant change, something which does not change, something permanent upon which all our ideas, our sensations fall to form a unity and a complete whole. And this is the real soul, the Atman of man. So the Atman is like the cinema screen on which all the colors of wave frequencies of light fall, different colors appear, different shapes appear, and we are seeing all those images, the movie inside our mind, because there is that screen. If the screen is not there, then that movie won't be perceived. And seeing that everything is material, whether we call it matter or mind, Swamiji will say matter and mind are the same thing, just at two different frequencies of vibration. When we call it matter, it is akasha and prana vibrating at a lower frequency. What we call the mind is same akasha and prana vibrating at a high frequency. So he says, whether you call it matter, fine matter or mind, must be changeful. Let me read that again. And seeing that everything is material, whether you call it fine matter or mind, it must be changeful. Seeing that whatever you call gross matter, the external world, must also be changeful in comparison to that. This unchangeable something cannot be of material substance. Therefore, it is spiritual. That is to say, it is not matter. It is indestructible, unchanging. So this is the what is the quality of the Atman? The fundamental quality. It cannot be sort of said, this is it, because it is so fine and so subtle that even the mind, which is a constant change, cannot grasp it. So the method by which they say is neti neti. Not this, not this. Is it this gross body? No. Is it the prana? No. It is the mind? No. Annamaya kosha, pranamaya kosha, manomaya kosha? No. Is it the vijnanamaya kosha? No. Is it the anandamaya kosha? No. What it is, by the time you come to it, you become it, you experience it. It's not an objective experience. It has become a subjective experience. At that moment, I am the Atman is experienced, not as a wave and a vritti in the mind space. You become one with it. It's anubhuti, it's an experience, not as a concept or idea. But at that moment, in that in that core of that experience, there's no change. There's no creation, no projection, no destruction. And that unchangingness is called immortality. And the Atman is immortal. And we are that Atman here and now. In that state, we are immortal. But when the moment we begin to get experience associated, identified with this changeable character, the changeable ego, the changeable buddhi, the changeable mind, changeable physical body, then we have drifted away from that locus, that anchor, that grounding of ourselves as the Atman, and have become identified with something which is changing. And then the effort is there. How do I make this unchanging? Yeah, I don't want to die. Okay. And life is about this struggle between the external world and this internal world. We are constantly trying to transcend that change, whether we are going to eat food so that we don't die of hunger, or we're going to build a nice house that we don't die because of exposure to the extremes of the weather, or we'll have medications and so that we don't die because of viruses and diseases. What deep inside it's built in our spiritual DNA that we are that indestructible being. However, in ignorance, we are trying to make this body-mind complex indestructible, immortal. You'll find that in the Puranas, when these asuras, they would do tremendous amount of tapasya, and lo and behold, one of the gods like Brahma or Vishnu or Shiva will come and bless them and say, what is the boon that you want? And they will ask for that immortality. But the understanding if immortality is not the immortality of the Atman, it is the immortality of the body. And therefore, like Hiranyakashipu and others, they say, oh, Bhasmasura, they say, may I not die. No animal can kill me, no man can kill me, all those things. What they're talking about is the death of the body, trying to avoid that it should remain permanent. But by the very nature of things, it cannot, that which is impermanent cannot be made permanent. On the other hand, what we're looking for, the Atman is ever permanent, ever free. But what we have to go beyond is this identification with this body-mind complex. And spirituality, spiritual life, spiritual practice is about this letting go. And that's why renunciation, giving up this identification with this body-mind complex, forms the very basis of spiritual life. Giving up this identification with this changing things so that we can get ourselves anchored in that unchanging nature. So when Yamraj offered all those temptations and enjoyments to Nachiketa, boy of 7, that's where that buddhi, spiritual intelligence from previous lifetimes, so sharp, he says, oh, thank you very much. Dhruvam adhruveshu na prarthayante. A person, a wise person, dhira, that's the word that's used in the Upanishads. Dhruvam means eternal. Adhruveshu means transitory. Na prarthayante, one should not seek. One should not seek for permanence in transitory things. So this Atman founds there is something beyond this changing body, changing the mind. The Buddhists would say, yes, there is a constant change in the body and the mind, but they don't say there is an unchanging reality behind it. While the Vedantis say, no, the ultimate reality, the highest reality, is an unchanging thing that is eternal, immortal, that is the Atman and Brahman, that is the ocean behind the waves. And the waves can come and go, but the ocean remains. As a totality, it always is there. The waves appear and disappear in time, space, and causation. That time, space, and causation in which all these changes appear and disappear, according to Vedanta, is called Maya from the scientific point of view. Kala, Desha, Nimitta. Time is Kala, Desha means space, Nimitta is cause and effect, that continuous change that is happening in the Vedanta language. So here Swamiji has introduced this idea of the Atman and how that idea was developed. If you plan, see how, he talks about everything is from the cosmology and psychology. He talks about the vibration, everything in this world is moving, changing, prana and akasha, and what is happening in the macrocosm, that samasti, also happens in the vesti, in the individual in particular, but they are built on the same plane. So let us start with the internal part of it. That is the Vedantic, the Hindu approach. They said, we will not go and conquer the outer world and go to Mars and Jupiter and Venus and all those things. We'll conquer the internal world. And they started to try to understand what is this real man? What is the reality behind it? Internally, inward looking. Okay, nivritti path. And said, okay, let's start with the mind. Try to understand the mind. Mind is made of chitta, mana, buddhi, ahankara. And then what is knowledge? All our experiences. Okay, it is the external world plus the mind. We don't experience the external world. It always remains unknown and unknowable. And the same applies when we try to know the internal world, the Atman. So this, whether it's the physical body or the mind, all it is a constant river that is continuously flowing, a vast mass of energy. Okay, but behind that change is the unchanging witness, Shakshi, the observer. So the things can be there. In Buddhism, there's somebody observing. Who is observing? If you say the observer doesn't exist, only changes are happening, then who's telling that change is there? So this conscious principle, that is the totality on which all these changes are happening, on which this observation is happening, that unchanging, the screen on which the movie is being projected, That is the indestructible self, the Paramatman. And we'll take that up. What is this Atman and Paramatman and the qualities and the nature of it, the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, and the doctrine of the Atman in its application. So I think it's a good place to end here. If somebody has any questions. So what I would suggest is, look, there's some ideas one needs to chew the cud. Shravan Manan Nididhyasan. So we have to read this sentence by sentence, try to assimilate that idea. The more times you go through this, much more clarity will come. And that revision, swadhyaya, the study, it's important. Then you'll find so much deep meaning will come, and you'll sort of prepare yourself for the topics that are coming subsequently, and you'll have a deep understanding of the Vedanta philosophy, the Advaita Vedanta philosophy that Swamiji said. It's very logical, rational, and this is the philosophy that will satisfy the modern mind, where they want a religion that is both rational, a philosophy that is both rational and religious at the same time. All right. If there are no questions, then we will conclude here. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tassat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you all.
Namaste.